You mentioned before that oligopolies would not exist in a free market. Can you elaborate on this, and how do you explain Rockefeller having 90% of the oil market at one point during the Gilded Age? And then there's another question here. Ayn Rand did not admire Rockefeller, as she said herself. I don't remember that. So he's just zero-sum to her in spite of all his achievement, from hero to zero, really. I don't remember Ayn Rand saying that she did not admire Rockefeller. So, I mean, I certainly admire Rockefeller. And I don't believe Rockefeller had what you're calling an oligopoly, although technically what Rockefeller had, technically based on, I think, silly economics, he had a monopoly, because 90% would define a monopoly. But I don't believe that is a monopoly. So I don't believe you define a monopoly based on the market share that you have. I think monopolies and oligopolies are defined based on whether they have government protection or not. As long as they don't have government protection, there's always competition. Always competition. So, for example, we learn in economic textbooks that if you have a 90% share of a market, then you're a monopolist, and therefore what you do is you raise prices on lower quality because you have no competition. So what the hell? You raise prices above your marginal cost. You raise them as high as you can, so that up to the point where you don't lose enough customers, so you're maximizing your profit in that way. And Rockefeller didn't do that. And you can go back and look at the evidence. There's plenty of evidence, and I highly, highly recommend. There's an essay that Alex Epstein wrote on Rockefeller. Just put Alex Epstein and John D. Rockefeller into Google search and you'll find it. But also, I would recommend The Myth of the Robber Barons. The Myth of the Robber Barons, which is a book by Robert, I'm not sure if it's Robert, it's Folsom, by Folsom, who describes what happened. And if you look at the numbers, Rockefeller decreased prices every single year and increased quality every single year, while he had 90+% of the oil refining capacity in the United States. So he was, they tell us, a monopolist. It didn't behave like a monopolist. In my view, he wasn't a monopolist. He was in competition. It's just the competition was unseen, because the competition was the potential of somebody to outmaneuver him, to lower prices below his, to create a product better than his. And that was in the 1870s. And at the time in the 1870s, he was producing oil primarily Burton Folsom, B-U-R-T-O-N, Folsom, F-O-L-S-O-M. That is, I recommend all his books. Myth of the Robber Baron is the best, but they're all excellent. Everything he wrote is worth reading if you're interested in economic history. Anyway, why did he do it? Because he knew there was competition. And who competed him out of what he was producing? Well, if you look at the 1870s, and Rockefeller's producing this oil, he's refining oil, and he's refining oil into what? Into kerosene. And what's the kerosene being used for? Lighting. And who competed him out of the business of lighting? Thomas Edison. Electricity. Now, what bureaucrat, what judge in a court, what jury in a court would have predicted that? Would have predicted that while he was charging what he was charging for oil, doing what he was doing, lowering prices every year, there was somebody who was going to outcompete him in a completely different industry, but outcompete him out of that business. And by the way, by the time Rockefeller's Standard Oil was broken up, I think it was the 1920s, he had gone from 90% to 25% or something in the 20s, not because of government, not because of antitrust, not because he was broken up, because he was only broken up in the 20s, but because of competition. And he knew it. So he had to be on his toes. He had to keep fighting. He had to keep innovating. He was one of the most innovative entrepreneurs in all of human history. He should be massively admired. Now, maybe there's some reason not to admire him that has to do with his personal life. I don't know. But as a businessman, he's one of the true greats. One of the true greats. Didn't take government subsidies. Was not involved in trying to, in cronyism. And he was one of the giants. So what if he had 90%? My point is not that a business will not dominate an industry. My point is that domination is not bad, just like Google today dominates search. But how much does it charge you for that search? Zero. And if you think it has a monopoly over internet advertising, but that is too narrow. Does it have a monopoly over advertising, over marketing? No. People have lots of choices when it has to marketing and advertising, even on the internet. But yes, it has some ridiculous percentage of all that. So, I mean, Liberal Deutsch, you'll have to give me a reference for where Ayn Rand says she didn't like Rockefeller. I don't remember that. I'm not saying it's not true. I just don't remember it. So that's my answer on monopolies. And I've done a number of videos on monopolies. You might want to search Yaron Brook Monopoly, and you'll get, generally, if you have questions, a lot of times if you just type my name in and the question, I've already answered it for a lot of it, right?
When you say that society has no responsibility here, I think individuals have a responsibility to themselves. Is that it?
I don't like the word responsibility involved here.
All right, well, what should we say then? Help me. Do what I wish to do. Is that your point? That the more...
No. Do what I rationally think is right, according to the right morality. And help others if you can, but not as a primary obligation. And now, in regard to society, there is no such thing as society, you know. It's all of us. Now, how can we have obligations which we didn't undertake? See, the parents of a child would have obligations for him up to a certain age, since they brought him into the world, but they can't do what is impossible to them. So it doesn't mean that they can at any moment throw the burden on the rest of us. We're a society, everybody's society, and we can't have unearned obligations and unchosen obligations.
What in the Ayn Rand civil context would be appropriate societal measures to accommodate the ungifted?
Their own parents, and a chance to give their parents to earn money. If, however, their parents are poor and cannot assume it, it's a big, heavy burden, then you can appeal to private charity, as it was always done before welfare statism in this country.
You want private charity as well for the gifted?
If necessary. They usually, in a free society, they won't need it. They'll make their own way, just so you don't stop them. But private charity cannot be done by means of tax collection, which means by force. Private charity is up to you, and if it's a worthy cause, that is, let's say, a subnormal child who certainly cannot help it, it's perfectly all right to help him, but not at the sacrifice of your own child.
You probably like to get rid of HEW then?
Oh, certainly. Oh, certainly. Much more than that. I'd like to get rid of.
A lot of the government, huh?
Everything except the basic duties of the government, which is police, law courts, armed forces.
You want less government. All right.
Thank you.
Well, everybody says that. It's a little hard to put that into effect when we've got a country that has such a maldistribution of wealth. You'll give me that, huh? Too few rich, too many poor.
I will give you part of that, because if there is a maldistribution, it's to those who have political pull. If some of your money is made with government help and government favoritism, then I grant you that is unfair and improper and unjust. But if you made it yourself in free competition, enough people want to pay you for your services or your product, then you should keep all of it. Why shouldn't you? You made it.
All right. Okay. You also think if the Middle Eastern countries want to hold us up for the oil at $5 a barrel, or a gallon, excuse me, $5, will that day ever be back? They ought to be able to do it. It's their oil. Is that your point?
No. My point is we should not have permitted altruistically to all those nations to nationalize what we built for them. They took... because we are now moving towards complete collectivism or socialism, a system under which everybody is enslaved to everybody. And we are moving that way only because of our altruist morality.
Yes, but you say everybody is enslaved to everybody, yet this came about democratically, and free people in a free country voted for this kind of government, wanted this kind of legislation. Do you object to the democratic process?
I object to the idea that people have the right to vote on everything. The traditional American system was a system based on the idea that majority will prevailed only in public or political affairs, and that it was limited by inalienable individual rights. Therefore, I do not believe that a majority can vote a man's life or property or freedom away from him. Therefore, I do not believe that if a majority votes on any issue, that this makes the issue right. It doesn't.
All right, then how do we arrive at action? How should we arrive at action?
By voluntary consent, voluntary cooperation of free men, unforced officials. The powers of government are strictly limited. They will have no right to initiate force or compulsion against any citizen except a criminal. Those who have initiated force will be punished by force, and that is the only proper function of government. What we would not permit is the government to initiate force against people who have hurt no one, who have not forced anyone. We would not give the government or the majority or any minority the right to take the life or the property of others. That was the original American system.
When you say take the property of others, I imagine that you're talking now about taxes.
Yes, I am.
And you believe that there should be no right by the government to tax. You believe that there should be no such thing as welfare legislation, unemployment compensation, regulation during times of stress, certain kinds of rent controls and things like that.
That's right. I'm opposed to all forms of control. I am for an absolute, laissez-faire, free, unregulated economy. Let me put it briefly. I'm for the separation of state and economics, just as we had separation of state and church, which led to peaceful coexistence among different religions after a period of religious wars. So the same applies to economics. If you separate the government from economics, if you do not regulate production and trade, you will have peaceful cooperation and harmony and justice among men.